Hi folks. I've posted these lectures to kind of fill in some of the gaps. I mean, normally if we were taking a class on ground, we'd be doing a lot of things on the whiteboard. Because this is an online class, or maybe miss the class, I might actually post some of these lectures for some of my 101 sections that I teach face to face as well. This will be a way of showing what we've gone over or what you would have missed if this is an online class. So if you turn to slide 26 in lecture 3, you'll notice a slide that says equilibrium. And you'll see a supply and demand, a market graph. So I'm going to go ahead and draw it out. Over here we have on the y-axis we have price, and over here on the quantity axis we have Q. I should mention in my sections I want my students to graph, and part of answering a graphing short answer question properly is to fully label your graph. So the way that you can show me that you know that this is a quantity axis is by putting a Q on the x-axis. The way that you can show me that you know that this is the price axis is by putting a P right next to it. And then what we have over here is a downward sloping demand curve. The demand curve from left to right goes from higher to lower, and then our supply curve is upward sloping. So in this slide, slide 26, it says equilibrium. You'll notice that we have an equilibrium price, which I'll denote as PE. And that price is the one price that brings the quantity supplied, all points along the supply curve, represents different quantities that producers are willing to supply the market based on the price. That brings in quantity supplied in line with quantity demanded. All points along the demand curve represent points that different quantities that consumers or buyers are willing to buy based on different prices. So at the equilibrium price, quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded, and we'll call the quantity where they intersect the equilibrium quantity. All right, the point of this slide is to show you that in a market where prices are free to change, if a price is not the equilibrium price, we may have a shortage or surplus, but if prices are free to change, we should eventually go back to the equilibrium price. So let's imagine that we have a price in the market that we'll call high, P high. Now, by high, I don't mean that you look at the price and you freak out and you say that's really, really expensive. You might look at this price. And say that it seems reasonable to you. The only thing we mean by P high is that it's higher than the equilibrium price. Okay, so how is a high price in the market going to affect consumers and producers? So what we're going to do is we're going to move down the demand curve from left to right. We're going to look at how buyers in the market behave. They're going to move down the demand curve until they encounter P high. And then over here what we'll do is we'll drop a line down to the quantity axis, and this is quantity demanded. Okay, what about sellers? What about producers? How do they react to a high price? Well, sellers like a high price. So what you have to imagine is that in a market where the price is P high, PE does not exist, and producers are going to move up the supply curve until they encounter P high. So if this is the price, we would expect sellers or producers to produce more, and this would be the quantity that would be supplied to the market. Okay, what's the problem we have here? The problem we have is that there's one quantity for sellers and another quantity for buyers. And the quantity supplied, which is what sellers are willing to provide, is greater than the quantity demanded, which is what people are willing to buy in that market at that price. Okay, so what happens when quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded? We have a surplus. Okay, so this doesn't seem like it would be very good for the market. I think I've mentioned earlier that the assumption we're going to make is that prices are free to adjust. How would a market where prices are free to adjust get back to the equilibrium price? Well, what you have to imagine, clear this surplus. What you have to imagine is that there's some sellers in the market that are responding to this high price by either producing more, putting more onto the market, but unfortunately they're not selling that quantity. So what they're going to do is they're going to offer to sell, take maybe a discount, offer to sell at a lower price. That's going to attract some more buyers into the market. What's happening to our surplus? Well, we still have a surplus, but it's getting smaller, because if as producers lower the price, they bring in more buyers into the market, We still probably have a little bit of a surplus, but it's shrinking. It's getting smaller and smaller as the price gets closer to the equilibrium price, PE. Just imagine that the goal is to get to a price where there's neither surplus nor shortage. Well, once we get to PE, the market all by itself has cleared the surplus. In other words, quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded. And again, in a market where prices are free to change, we expect that this will happen. Now, how quickly does that happen? That depends on the market. Some markets, you'll have prices change very, very quickly. For instance, if you're talking about, let's say, the stock market, when the trading day is happening, buyers and sellers are getting together every second, every fraction of a second. So for that moment in time, those people who are active in the market are setting the price in that market, and you don't expect that there would be a long period of time during the trading day for transactions not to take place. If we're talking about the housing market, that could be a totally different story. You could have a surplus existing in the housing market for a long, long time. Why is that? Because some sellers have a price in their mind that maybe is way up here. They don't realize that in the market that price is too high, and it might take them a while for them to adjust their expectations. Now let's try the other one. Let's talk about what happens when the price is too low in a market. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this, clean up the board a little bit, and this time instead of talking about a price being too high, we're going to talk about what happens in a market when the price is too low. So get rid of P high, get rid of this, clean things up a little bit, and now let's imagine that the price instead is over here, it's P low. So how are producers and consumers going to react when a price in the market is too low? So let's go ahead and we'll start off again with buyers in the market, and buyers move along the demand curve. So what you have to imagine is when the price is too low, this is the price that exists in the market, PE does not. Buyers are going to move from left to right down the demand curve. The equilibrium price doesn't exist, so they're going to blow right past that. And finally, when they get to P low over here, we will drop a line down to the quantity axis, and this is going to be quantity demanded. Okay, what about sellers? How do sellers react? Well, to get an idea how sellers are going to react, we're going to move up the supply curve from left to right. We're going to keep on going until we get to P low, and then we'll drop a line down to the quantity axis. Sellers are not impressed with this price because this price is low. Okay, so what happens? Why do economists believe that if in a market where prices are free to adjust, this shortage that we have, right? The difference between quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. When quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied, we have a shortage. Why do economists believe that a market will take care of the shortage all by itself? Well, what you have to imagine is that there's certain people in the market who are not able to buy the good. They really want to buy the good, but there's not enough quantity available. So what they might do, these buyers, would be signal that they're willing to pay a higher price. When they signal that they're willing to pay more, that will bring some more supply onto the market. Does that shortage go away right away? Maybe, or maybe it's going to be a slower process. But what we do expect is as buyers signal that they're willing to pay more supply will come onto the market, and the shortage will get smaller. Okay, what happens if buyers continue to signal that they're going to pay more? Eventually we'll get to the equilibrium price. We'll get to a price where we no longer have a surplus, or in this case a shortage, and the market has done that all by itself. Okay, so then the question is, how quickly does this happen? And the answer is it depends on the market. In some markets it might happen very, very quickly. If we're talking about a very active market like the stock market, that could happen in seconds or fractions of a second. If we're talking about other markets that need more time to respond, then that could take conceivably longer. But this is what we believe is going to happen. We believe that markets, if left to their own devices, will clear any surpluses and shortages. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over to slide 27. So let me do that real quick. You guys can't see this. And we'll discuss that one. So in slide 27, what you'll notice is a matrix. And in that matrix, we have changes in demand and changes in supply. The one that I want to work on is the one in the middle, which says that when there's an increase in supply coupled with an increase in demand, we're not too sure what's going to happen. I highly encourage you guys, I'm only going to do this one, but I highly encourage you guys to do these on your own and convince yourself, for instance, when there is an increase in demand and no change in supply, then we will always see prices go up and quantities go up. Or, do what I'm about to do and convince yourself that when we have a situation where you have a decrease in demand and a decrease in supply, we're not too sure what's going to happen to the price, but we know the quantity is going to go down. All right, so what we'll do, being that we're doing the one in the middle, an increase in supply coupled with an increase in demand, is we're going to draw out our graph. We're going to draw a demand curve. I'm going to call this D1. That's to signify that this is our initial demand curve. We're going to draw out a supply curve. I'm going to call this S1 over here. This is to signify that this is our initial supply curve. And we're going to see what happens when we increase demand. Increased demand is a rightward shift in the demand curve, and increased supply at the same time. An increase in supply would be a rightward shift in supply. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at price, and we're going to look at quantity, and we're going to convince ourselves that there's different possibilities, but if we take into consideration all these different possibilities, we are not too sure what's going to happen to price, but we are sure that quantity is going to go up. So if this is our initial equilibrium over here, then what we'll do is we'll call this P1, we'll call this Q1. I've done this, by the way, a few times, so I know how this works out. You guys maybe haven't had as much practice, so this is why I recommend maybe turning this slide, grabbing a piece of paper, grabbing a pencil, and playing around with this the old-fashioned way. I realize on MindTap they have ways for you to move the supply curve and the demand curve, but from my perspective, it's not the same thing as doing it the old-fashioned way. I'm all about technology, don't get me wrong, technology is fine, but technology doesn't always do things better. And this is one example where the old-fashioned way of doing this might actually lead you to the correct answer. All right, so we've got our initial equilibrium. We've got an initial equilibrium price called P1, an initial equilibrium quantity called Q1. And what we want to do is we want to get an increase in demand. So this is our increase in demand. We're shifting the demand curve to the right. And I'm going to cheat a little bit. I know that one possibility is that we could wind up with a situation like this. So this is our increase in supply. Okay, by saying that I'm cheating, I'm just using the knowledge that I've already gained. There's no reason why you should know this if you haven't done this. Even if you had an econ class in high school, it's quite possible that you didn't do this, right? Okay, so what happens? This is our initial equilibrium E1. This is our new equilibrium E2. What happened to the equilibrium price in this situation? Well, it didn't change. Our new equilibrium price, P2, is identical to P1. What about our equilibrium quantity? Our equilibrium quantity went from Q1 to Q2. So in this case, there was no change in price. That's why I'm recording it this way here. And the quantity went up. Okay, so that's one possibility. Another possibility, I got to clean up the board. Remember, this is our P1 over here. I'm going to go ahead and erase our shift in the demand curve. I'm going to leave the shift in the supply curve the same. All I'm going to do is play around with shifting the demand curve. If you do this on your own, you should see that you'll get the same results whether you leave the shift in the demand curve the same or the supply curve the same. The point is you get different outcomes depending on how much you shift one curve relative to the other. All right, so imagine that this is our shift in our supply curve, and this time we're going to get an increase in demand, but it's going to be very, very small by comparison. So this is our increase in demand, this is D2. This becomes our new equilibrium over here. We'll call that E2. I'm going to drop a line down here to the quantity axis. This is Q2. I'm going to drop a line over here to the price axis. This is P2. So in the second instance where we had an increase in supply coupled with a small increase in demand, what happened? Price went down and quantity went up. Okay, so that's interesting. that leads us to the conclusion that there's two different possibilities. I'm going to do one more to show you that there's actually three different possibilities. So let me just go ahead and clean up the board, get rid of our a small little shift in demand. Again, I'm going to leave the supply curve all alone. I'm going to go ahead and start us off on P1, Q1. This is our initial equilibrium. And this time what's going to happen, instead of getting like a little baby shift in demand, we're going to get a monster shift in demand. So this is our new shift in demand. This is D2. Remember, E1 is our initial equilibrium. What's our new equilibrium going to look like? It's going to be right here at E2. I'm going to drop a line down to the quantity axis. So this is Q2 over here. And then I'm going to bring a line down over here to the price axis. So this is P2 over here. And what do we see in a situation like this? In a situation like this, the price went up and the quantity went up as well. Okay, so those are the three different possibilities, and this is a reason why when we have an increase in supply coupled with an increase in demand, and we don't know more than that, the only thing we can say with any kind of certainty is that quantity is going to go up, but we're not too sure what's going to happen to price. This is one of the things that drives some people crazy about economics, is that we don't seem to have a firm answer for everything. But this is as close as we can come to a firm answer given the situation that was described to us. Does that make sense? So anyway, just wanted to point this out, and hopefully you will spend some time on your own doing the same kind of thing that I did, and not only do that with an increase in supply coupled with an increase in demand, but do the other 8 that are in that little matrix. I promise it won't take you that long, and you won't use that much paper or even spend that much time on it. Thanks a lot, folks.